Leonardo DiCaprio.
Miss Anne Hathaway.
Meryl Streep, the Iron Lady.
Alan Arkin in Little Miss Sunshine.
Kevin Costner.
The King's Speech.
Birdman.
I'm Connor Old, and welcome back to another episode of Redoing the Oscars, a weekly series where I pick a different Oscars category and talk about an alternative nominated pick that I think should have won, as well as an alternative non-nominated pick that I think should have at least been nominated or maybe have won. Talk about a little bit of that historical context and end off with that final question of, did the Academy make the right decision? We've been having a blast on this series so far. You guys have been really engaging with the videos, leaving comments below talking about why you think that actor is great or maybe another pick from that category. Feel free to do that. I'd love to hear your thoughts. It doesn't necessarily need to be, in this case, the best supporting actor, which your alternative pick would be. Maybe this year you can pick another category like Best Lead Actor or Best Director or Best Picture. We like to switch it up every single week. So last week we talked about, the Best Director category as an example. This week we're going to talk about Best Supporting Actor and why I think Ed Harris should have won in The Truman Show. But we're going to get to that. Without further ado, let's jump into things, starting off with that historical context. Where were we in 1998? What Oscars year is this? What were the other movies in contention? And as an Oscars fan, this is one of my favorite years because it is so indicative of the future of the Oscars and both the kind of genius move, but also the destructive move and the legacy of Harvey Weinstein at the Oscars. Now, it's difficult to pick one exact year in which Weinstein had the most influence or was representative of his era at the Oscars, but the truth is you can't tell the history of the Oscars without him. He was incredibly important for about a 10-15 year period there before all the allegations came out and before he had lost his step. The Weinstein era and effect on some of these movies is a huge representation of the Oscars. But if I were to pick one year, it would be 1998. It would be the year that actually Harvey Weinstein won an Oscar for Best Picture. And some of these insidious ways that I'm talking about are not the allegations and the horrific actions that the man himself, did, but some of the insidious ways he affected the importance of the Oscars and how he kind of gamified the system, essentially creating fake buzz for a movie that wasn't there, outwardly talking trash about other movies and how they're not necessarily as good. And what you have is a year of 1998 where you have a legendary, iconic film that people knew at the time would be an iconic film, an important film, a film that's going to last the test of time. One of our premier filmmakers in Steven Spielberg making Saving Private Ryan with a great star in Tom Hanks. It makes a lot of money at the box office. It really resonates. It's an iconic film. And they give him Best Director, but it doesn't win out to Best Picture. And part of that has to do with this smart campaign strategy. That's what I mean in terms of some of the insidious stuff. Negatively going out and talking to people at parties of how bad Saving Private Ryan is, because Shakespeare in Love was kind of the number two. Sending countless DVDs to Oscar voters' houses with Shakespeare in Love to kind of create a sense of fake buzz or fake popularity, that if they didn't reward this movie, it would look bad on them for years to come because it was so popular. Now, the movie itself, I think, is a pretty charming movie with a great Gwyneth Paltrow performance, but it is, I think, ultimately seen negatively because its reputation is tied to this, corrupt and really despicable man in Harvey Weinstein. And then also, I think, from a historical perspective, I recognize this year more than any as the one where Saving Private Ryan kind of got robbed, and instead the kind of campaign machine and the popularity machine overrode the kind of ultimate purity of the film, of the ceremony, which is to reward what the best movie of the year was, or what they thought the best movie of the year was, and instead it went to a movie that maybe had this manufactured sense of popularity and importance that it ultimately didn't have, and was created by this kind of genius campaigning marketing machine done by the Weinstein Company. So it is this kind of very interesting year because it's a fascinating strategy that impacts the next 10, 15 years of the Oscars, but is also kind of insidious in its way of how easily the Oscars and the voting process could be manipulated. We're not talking about Best Picture on this episode, but that's kind of the Oscars context and where we were at the time. Shakespeare in Love actually ends up going and winning 2 acting Oscars. One for Gwyneth Paltrow, which is very well deserved, and she's fantastic in the film. And I'm glad she has an Oscar because she's a legendary actress, even working today. And then you have Judi Dench, who is a great actress, but this is an incredibly poor win. She's in the movie for like 8 minutes, and this is not a Beatrice Straight in Network scenario where you have one dynamite scene. She's mostly just kind of prancing around, looking stoically, representing the Queen, and doesn't do much within the film, but is indicative of the riding the success of what seemed like to be a popular movie at the time. I think it's a very poor win, and it hasn't aged the best. Not talking about that category, just because I wasn't sure what my alternative pick would have been. Maybe something like Kathy Bates in Primary Colors, because I really like that movie. But she had already won an Oscar before, so I didn't know what necessarily to do there. Then you have Best Actor for Roberto Benigni, who wrote, directed, and starred in Life is Beautiful, which was a big deal at the time. Another kind of a Weinstein movie era. Because Benigni didn't go on to have an amazing career, I think this movie is thought of kind of negatively, although I think it's charming and sweet and fun. It wouldn't have been my pick for Best Lead Actor, but it was definitely important at the time, so I can't necessarily look back on it and go like, oh, that was an odd win. And then you won't have that iconic moment of him jumping over the chairs, so I didn't really want to redo that either. Instead, I picked up maybe more of a controversial category to redo, which is the Best Supporting Actor category, which went to James Coburn for Affliction. And let's get into things. My alternative nominated pick that I would have rewarded Best Supporting Actor to would have been Ed Harris in The Truman Show. And the reason why I went with Ed Harris, we'll talk about. The reason why I picked this category for Best Supporting Actor is because I just don't like legacy awards. And I think Ed Harris may win in the next few years for kind of a legacy award win. And when I mean legacy, James Coburn Affliction is okay. I think it's a little bit of a broad performance, but it's not his most iconic performance. It's not Magnificent Seven. It's not Pat Garrett. But they're rewarding him for Affliction because they like him in those other movies. And just from a personal perspective and a historical perspective, when we're redoing these things, I almost always redo legacy award wins because their legacy is the legacy that they've rewarded for the Oscars. And I like the Oscars to reward great actors at the time for their most iconic role. They're doing a good thing when they give it to, let's say, Russell Crowe in Gladiator, but then a bad thing when they don't give it to, let's say, Johnny Depp in Pirates of the Caribbean, the first one there. So that's what I'm kind of pointing at. But the reason why I went with Ed Harris here is because he's an actor that we thought he would eventually win one day, and then at a certain point you realize you hadn't had the opportunity to reward him because he's missed out on all his iconic roles. And this is an iconic role, a classic Jim Carrey movie. So much so that I know it's iconic because a few months ago on Twitter, there was a whole series of memes using his character to kind of talk about people controlling someone's life or certain events that are going on. Truman Show today is a kind of word that's being used still in kind of like the lexicon of what if I was on the Truman Show, where this guy got kind of Truman Showed. It is a kind of a verb in the sense. It's still admired today. It is a beautiful film, and I think what I love most about Ed Harris and his performance in it is his decision of how he plays his character, which is to be himself a sensitive artist, a sincere. What I think I love most about the performance is I think Ed Harris thinks this guy is not the villain, that he is genuinely like the sensitive artist and trying to do the right thing, even though he is, ultimately creating this fascinating fake world for Truman. I think he genuinely believes as an actor and then ultimately as a performer, as Christof, that this is the right thing for Truman. But I love that choice of making him more of an artist type, because he could have been a kind of craven TV exec. And instead, it takes what would have been, I think, a more traditional, bad, evil guy that's not looking out for Truman, to a more sensitive artist type who's treating this as a kind of fascinating psychological art portrait, and that he and his flaw as a character is ultimately believing in himself too much and becoming too much of this kind of godlike figure that controls every aspect of his life, and one man feeling in control ultimately of another man's life, and the fallacy and destructive nature of that ultimately, which the movie portrays over the next few over the story. And it's all those just little choices that give off this idea of the artist type. The beret that he's wearing, the soft-spokenness, the pacing between some of his words. I mean, you can look at, I think, a performance like Cate Blanchett in Tar and link it back to someone like Christoph here in The Truman Show in terms of how this idea that we have of the sensitive artist type in many ways was established with Ed Harris, with the kind of self-seriousness, the glasses, the beret, the slow, considered state of speech that seems more intelligent because you're taking your time and being very considerate, almost thinking on the spot, and the use, careful sometimes, of no hands versus hand movements. It's very considered, it's very calculated, and I think Ed Harris, establishes that kind of trope and that stereotype as the sensitive artist type, and funnily enough, in Truman Show, in this movie, as this kind of all-seeing, all-knowing, elitist, prestigious director, in this case of one man's life. So a great performance and a great movie and a perfectly ultimately calculated decision that I think deepens the script and deepens the movie more so than another choice that would have been a little bit more simplistic. So the choice by an actor actually makes the movie more interesting, and that has to be a strong testament to the performance itself as well. So an actor actually influencing the success of the film, it has to be rewarded in this chance, and I love Ed Harris as an actor, and this is a great opportunity to reward him for a great performance in a movie that has stood the test of time, unlike a movie like Affliction. But talking about my alternative non-nominated pick, I went with Bill Murray in Rushmore. We've talked about Wes Anderson a few times now on this series. I love his films, and this may be one of my favorite performances, and I think is maybe my favorite Wes Anderson movie. And what I love about it is that I think it stands the test of time. This was a performance that I didn't really understand its revolution at the time, in the sense that when people saw it, historically I wasn't there, but what I was told and what you read about is that people didn't realize Bill Murray had this in him. They thought him as mostly just this kind of generic comedic star, and now he can do this kind of sad drama performance as well in this indie movie. Who knew Bill Murray could even do that? And I saw the movie for the first time and I didn't have that context. And even though I didn't have that context, I still really appreciated the movie, which is why I think it's ultimately a great performance. Because I still kind of understood the deep sadness and melancholy and depression that is going on with his character. Now I think other viewers are looking at like, oh wow, I didn't even know Bill Murray could do that. Essentially taking and deepening his movie star persona as the kind of smart aleck, sarcastic guy, and then deepening it to show that that guy, that smart, aleck, sarcastic guy, is really putting up a front for something a little bit more darker, a little bit more depressing. The fact that his wife and kids don't love him and he doesn't like his job and he's kind of stuck in things. And just sometimes what I love about his performance is this hangdog ability. When he's looking directly at the camera in this perfect kind of a symmetrical frame that Wes Anderson has put together, there's not an ounce of winking. There's not an inch of kind of fakeness. That hangdog feature, the way he just looks and carries his face, and just the physicality that he brings, is immediately readable, is immediately understandable as like a somewhat depressed, or definitely depressed guy who finds a spark in Max and his ideas and his kind of passion and verve for the world until they kind of, clash and then reconnect at the end. There are certain moments when he is very funny and has, I would say, like a Looney Tunes-esque relationship with him and Max, where he really just wants to kind of like strangle him of a sorts, and it can be this kind of depressed, chillax, laconic kind of a way of speaking, but then it can immediately get rageful and angry and get back at him at certain moments too. So it's, I think, great because it's a deepening of someone's movie star persona, especially now that I've seen more of Bill Murray's films. I do understand that kind of a wow appeal, but I think the fact that I didn't know that when I first saw the movie and still appreciated the performance, I think is incredibly funny. I think it's sad. It's the perfect tone for the movie. We always talk about that, which is like matching energy. Bill Murray absolutely does that here too. So a great performance and a very funny performance in a movie I really like too. And I think an iconic performance for Bill Murray. It elevated him into a certain cult status that I don't think he would have been had it just been for Ghostbusters and Stripes and things like that. But to end off this episode, did the Academy make the right decision? Like I was saying before, no. I think that legacy awards are ultimately incorrect, that they're bad for the Oscars, they're bad for history. When we look at Timothée Chalamet, who will eventually get his Oscar, but not right now. It's probably going to be for maybe not his best performance. In the same way, Leonardo DiCaprio wins for The Revenant, which is a movie I like, but it's not his best performance. Why did we wait for so long and not reward it in so many of his iconic performances to reward it for one that he's not necessarily the best in? We've done this with Al Pacino, we've done this with Will Smith. It never turns out well. So why not it's always hard, but in hindsight, if we're redoing the Oscars, let's just not do out legacy awards. In the same case of like James Coburn at the time, maybe we just don't give him the Oscar. And maybe it's just a fact of the matter that he didn't have the right movies during his career, and we're not going to reward him for his legacy, because that's almost unfair to the other performers. And in many ways, whenever you give out a legacy award win, you're just screwing someone else. I mean, there is that legacy where you go, okay, Al Pacino doesn't win in 72 for Godfather Part 2, or 74 for Godfather Part 2, and then he wins in Scent of a Woman, steals it from Denzel, and then Denzel wins, in Training Day, and steals it from Will Smith, and then Will Smith wins it in 2022 or 3 for King Richard, and then arguably maybe steals it for someone like a Benedict Cumberbatch. And it's just this constant kind of a fate. And in this case, I think James Coburn stole it from Ed Harris. And that's not necessarily right that one actor is winning for a legacy and a body of work rather than the performance itself. It may be easy at the time. I think it makes sense from a human nature point of view of those older Academy members who are like, oh, I like James Coburn. He's great in this movie. Let's give him an Oscar. But they're not seeing the forest for the trees. And constantly during this series, when we're redoing the Oscars and trying to think of it from a historical, grand point of view, I know it's difficult at the time to understand the historical context of when you're in history. But when we're redoing it from a bird's eye view, I think it's to me clear as day. Even though it's not necessarily the worst win on the night, James Coburn, it was the category that I felt most strongly about, in particular with how much I love this Ed Harris performance, that we could have given him the award here, we didn't, and we're going to be regretting it for 20 years plus now. The fact that Ed Harris is a great actor and he's never won one is kind of an odd thing when we think of Oscars history. But that's about it, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. Make sure you comment below. Let me know your thoughts on the 1998 Oscars and which performance you would have picked in the supporting actor category or any of the other major Oscar categories. I'd love to hear that in the comments down below. But that's about it. Until next week. Stay tuned.